Welcome to our session on Chasing Rainbows, Using eLearning for Makeup Days Can Work. We hope you enjoyed this informative presentation, and if you have any questions, please jot those down, and at the end of the session, you will have an opportunity to submit those questions and receive an email response back for your questions. So again, we'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. And you will meet all the districts that were involved in the pilot for the 2019-2020 eLearning project and hear from them and their successes and lessons learned throughout this process. Our agenda for today will be to kind of give you an introduction to the districts that were involved in our part of the pilot, and you will hear from them about lessons that they learned through this process and what they are planning within their district for any future e-learning opportunities.
Hi everyone, I am Kristen Hearne. I'm the coordinator of digital learning in Anderson School District 1.
Hello everyone, my name is Beth Abney and I work as the district technology coach in Anderson School District 2.
My name is Stewart Lee. I'm the Director of Instructional Innovation and eLearning in Anderson District 3.
Hi, I'm Anna Baldwin and I'm the Director of eLearning and Integration for Anderson School District 5.
Welcome everyone, I'm Dixon Brooks. I'm the Chief Instructional Officer for Lexington School District 2.
Hello everyone, I'm Angie Rye and I am Chief Academic Officer in Lexington School District 3.
All right, this is Kristen again, and I am going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we have learned in Anderson 1 through this year of being a pilot district for e-learning. The first thing that we've learned recently that are very, very important are the mock e-learning days that you might have within your school district. We had mock days set up last school year before we had any e-learning days that occurred to make sure that our students were practicing and that our teachers were practicing what this would really look like. And as we've entered into having some actual days plus this extended period of e-learning, we've really seen how important that is. We've seen maybe some of our teachers just kind of showed the students what to do instead of having the teachers or having the students actually participate in that. And once the students got home to do the actual e-learning, if they were only shown how to do it, they had a more difficult time than the students that were actually trying it out the way that it would actually look at home. So that is something that we have realized is very, very important to make sure that our students are prepared for being able to navigate e-learning when they get home by themselves or even with the help of a parent. Also, we were providing training and planning times for our teachers beforehand when they were creating their lessons. And in Anderson 1, our teachers used a choice board type lesson where the students were able to go in and make selections on which activity that they were going to use for the day for that certain subject area. And the training that we had with our teachers, first we showed them the template that we were going to use and talked to them about the different items they would need to include. And then after we had that one training, we also had times where we could sit down and plan with the teachers. So not only were we showing it to them, we were able to sit there and they could ask questions as they were creating the lessons and kind of ask, oh, do you think this would work out well with my students? And we could give them feedback, talk as a group to be able to work through some of those things as we were planning together. And that is something that proved to be very beneficial later on. One thing that we also learned, and this is something that just came up from actually having e-learning days, was the amount of time that it takes to complete those lessons. It's very different in a classroom where the teacher has it structured and the teacher knows, okay, in my classroom, this would typically take maybe 15 minutes to complete. And so they think, oh, for e-learning, this is going to take about 15 minutes. But then for some of our students, they got home and it ended up taking more like 45 minutes to complete that activity. For some students, it may have taken an hour. So that was something that we really had to evaluate later to kind of tweak the amount of time that those lessons were going to last, to make sure that they weren't sitting and completing something all day long that we only anticipated taking, a shorter period of time. And then also constant and consistent communication with our parents in our district was very, very helpful. Just making sure that they always knew what was going on. If something changed, making sure that that information was sent out at the district level as well as at the school level, trying to put it in any place that you could think of, whether it's on the school website, the district website, social media, maybe robocalls that are sent out. We didn't want to bombard parents, but we also found that the more places we could send it, the better the chance was that everyone was going to know what was happening. And the more the parents knew, the better everything seemed to go. And then the final thing that I felt was just very important for all of us were our mentor districts and working with each other, just based off of the lessons that other districts had learned the year before, being able to take some of that information and make e-learning better for ourselves. And having that constant support and being able to bounce ideas off of each other was just something that was invaluable for all of us.
All right, so this again is Beth Abney, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, we never did participate in an e-learning day prior to the prolonged closure that everyone in South Carolina had. So we did the mock days and tried to prepare everybody as best we could, but the one day where we had a little bit of ice and some snow, our superintendent decided to bring everybody to school, and it ended up being the right decision. But it was slightly unfortunate because we never did get to practice everything prior to the COVID-19 closure. So I will say that having the mock days that we had were very helpful, probably more so for our teachers than our students, because we did a survey just to ask teachers like what they felt they needed or what went well. And they were all very surprised at how adept the students were at downloading content to their Chromebooks. I will also say, though, that our teachers, through the prolonged closure, we found out that they didn't quite understand how to give the resources to our students that do not have the internet, making that easily accessible. So we had some teachers who were still posting things daily, and we have students, not a huge population, but a pretty significant population of students and teachers who do not have the internet at home for whatever reason. And so we kind of went through some pains with that for the first couple weeks of e-learning. But that brings up my next point, which is to include principals in those trainings. So the teachers were very great at downloading content. The students were great at it. But since we ended up doing, over the weekend, we closed, our principals were the ones that were in the school. And so the principals were for grades 3 through 5 in our district. They don't take the Chromebooks home, but we decided to send them home during the e-learning or COVID closure. And so the principals were the ones that had to kind of go in and download everything. And they didn't quite understand, them and the support staff, exactly how that works. And so that's something moving forward. I'll make sure that, everyone, not just teachers, knows how that works. And then brings up the next point that our support staff we found out they needed more training, even as far as like opening your email and being able to click on links in your email. Some of our support staff struggled with that. And so lastly, having my mentor, Anderson 5 as our mentor district, was so helpful. Our district is very small, and I serve as the instructional technologist for the entire district. And so I get pulled in a lot of different directions. And so being able to lean on other districts and kind of borrow, and I appreciate so much everyone being willing to help us as we move forward. And you'll notice if you go visit our website, it's very similar to Anderson 5 and Anderson 3. So I appreciate that. But just, you can't be afraid to ask for help, and people are willing to help. So that's all I got.
Okay, a lot of what I have to say has been said by Anderson 1 and 2 already, but communication is key. And if I said it once, I'll say it 3 or 4 more times. Communication is key, and that's with your stakeholders at home, that's with your students, that's with your teachers, that's with your support staff, that's with your administration, that's also with your district office staff. I can't tell you how many times During the actual e-learning day, and I'm not talking distance learning with COVID, I'm talking the actual e-learning day we had in February, we had several phone calls to the district office saying, hey, how do I do this? I can't get in touch with the school. Well, nobody's at the school. There's a reason for that. And instead of contacting the teachers, they said, well, I'm just going to call the district office. So communication, like Beth said, that everybody knows at least how to find the information. What I ended up doing was going back and making how to check email for faculty, but then also how to check your students' email for parents. So just like a flyer, one pager, how to use Google Classroom for parents. So a little one pager that parents could get, different things like that, so that we could provide at a distance communication and tools for parents really paid off in the long run. We had very few parents complain about not being able to do or being frustrated with how to do once we made all that information available to them, which we were able to do in a matter of, honestly, hours, having thought through this process, having looked at our mentor district and some of the shortcomings that they discovered last year in the process. We picked 200 minutes of instruction to compensate for the day being missed. And that was either every class at the high school or any kind of Carnegie unit bearing class would be in that 200-minute range, or in our 1 through 8 grades, we did 200 minutes, but that was just your core content. We didn't worry about your electives or your related arts for those age groups. We did the practice day beforehand, and all but shut off the internet to do that. So teachers really got a crash course on the practice day on how no internet works, and students did too, as far as having to download and then work offline, and then once they came back online, upload. The biggest problem with that, though, because we didn't shut down the internet, turning off the internet was an issue. So we asked the teachers to actually turn off the internet on each device so the kids wouldn't be able to cheat and get online. And that was something that, lesson learned, our teachers didn't know how to do, because we didn't train them on how to turn off and on the internet on a Chromebook. It was one of those things that we all thought, because we've done it before, oh yeah, everybody knows how to turn on the internet. Well, no, they don't. Even good teachers that you would expect, but no. So that comes to, just practice. And honestly, if we hadn't had the February day, I was already talking to the district superintendent and the assistant superintendents about having another practice day, because our practice day was back in September. And I said, we need to have another practice day this spring. And then all of a sudden, Mother Nature said, hey, I'm going to give you some ice. And we didn't actually have a practice day. We had a real day. So that worked out. Getting teachers to understand the difference between relevant instruction and worksheets, busy work, was still, even though we had an entire PD day in August devoted to how to make e-learning lessons, what to expect on an e-learning day. They worked in grade level groups as an entire district. And then that afternoon, they went back to their schools and worked individually, either grade level or subject level, on creating lessons. And actually our elementary schools, our 3 elementary schools, got together and they all created lessons so we broke up the year into 3 different areas. We said, okay, in the fall, we have hurricane season. So this is our hurricane season. We got to have, a joint effort for a lesson plan for K through 5 for this, time frame. And then in the wintertime, we've got snow and ice. So we had that part of the year. And then in the springtime, we've got thunderstorms and flooding and rain and torrential downpours and frog chokers and all that kind of stuff. So we had those kind of 3. So our elementary schools actually got together, and instead of one grade level at each school coming up with 3 different lessons, we had 3 schools working together coming up with those lessons. So it spread the workload out really well. And since in those grade levels, everybody's kind of teaching the same thing at the same time, much more so than it would be try to do that at a high school, where you can have different kids at different pacings depending on the classes. It worked out really well doing it that way with our elementaries. And we only have the 1 middle school, so that made it easy for them just to plan for themselves. The biggest takeaway that I saw was I went back and pulled our numbers from our weather makeup day in 2019, which we were out of school for. And then when the kids came back for the actual makeup day, which was, I don't know, June or whatever, May, whenever the actual makeup day, come back to school was, we had 13% of our students not come back on the makeup day. But on the e-learning day, we only had 10% of our students not ultimately turn in the assignment. So we had a higher attendance rate because of e-learning, even though nobody physically attended the school. So I thought that was a great point to make, that we increased our attendance numbers simply by having the e-learning option. And then the last thing I'm going to say on this slide is that our paraprofessionals, we provided some sort of training, a 3-hour, PD session for them to do so they could get paid for that day still. And we really needed to go back, and we're still in the process of completing this side of the project, because COVID really put a backseat to this project. Level of PD we picked for some of our parapros and office staff was way too advanced, and it was very basic Google product kind of training that we felt that they needed, and they do need, but to get them to the point where they can actually do unattended Google training was something that we didn't realize that we needed to backtrack and actually, take 2 more steps backwards to get them trained up. And so one of the big questions that our board had when it came to the e-learning was, do our kids actually have access to internet at home, and how's that going to look if we're going to ask them to do stuff at home? And, the argument is, well, they can download it and do it offline. Well, not everybody can do that, especially in an extended period of time like we found with COVID. And this is my latest parent survey. I've actually got 30 more responses, but it didn't change the results percentage-wise. So we're looking at, actually, in our district, which is a very rural district, if you look up our numbers, we have 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school, about 2,600 students. And there are probably more cows and hay fields than there are houses and families in our zone. So when I look at this and I see that only 3.7, or actually it's about 3.5% of our houses report not having reliable internet, to me, that's very promising as far as the e-learning model working, even in a rural, even in a very Title I heavy district that we're in. And then when I ask them, what is your typical internet access as far as devices and how do you actually access the internet? I'm sorry, I got the numbers backwards. 1.9% said they don't have reliable internet. 3.7% said they don't have internet access because it's not available to them. So, we have devices at home that the kids are using, that the parents are using, and they have internet. Even if it's slow, or even if it's through a hotspot on a phone, they have access. Now, at all of our schools, we have hotspots, even at the district office. So you have a designated parking spot. So you can drive up, park, and you're on camera, and you are close enough to an access point that you can get good, fast, reliable school internet at each one of our schools and the district office. But then we also got some of the buses during COVID from the state with Wi-Fi access on them. And what I'm finding is that parents aren't using those so much. We thought they would, but the fact that they still have to travel, if they use something, they're going to town and they're going to Starbucks, they're going to McDonald's, they're going to Burger King, or they're coming to one of the schools and parking from the school. They're not using the buses so much, and they're actually not using the schools as much as they're going into town or going to a neighbor's house. So that was actually an interesting finding that I found when I started actually kind of looking at the numbers and talking to parents after the fact. And then the final thing, I just wanted to throw this up. If you want to take a look at some of the comments, I've got it linked here. So you have a link to the presentation. And so if you want to take a look at some of the comments from our stakeholders, those are mostly parents. There are teachers' responses included in that. But it's a good snapshot. There are some bad ones in there. Some people that didn't like it. I included those so you can see what they had to say. But just click on that link at the bottom where it says more comments from stakeholders, and you can take a look at some of the feedback we've gotten from our actual e-learning day, not our COVID extended distance learning, whatever we're going to call it.
I'd like to share a few things that some of you have already spoken about from Anderson 5's perspective. This was our second pilot year. We were able to pilot 2 years ago, and we had 2 e-learning days that year. And then this year we had 1 practice day prior to the COVID closures. So I just want to share with you some things that we learned as a district. The online online versus offline activities, and how important it is for teachers and students to be able to practice that and to understand that. In Anderson 5, we use Google Apps for Education and Google Classroom as our LMS. And with the Chromebook, students are able to work offline. And that was one of the big selling reasons for us to go with the Chromebook, is that students would be able to utilize the devices if they did not have internet access. So when teachers created lessons, it was the issue for them to understand what activity is considered an offline activity. So, for example, they might post a PDF, but the students can't access the PDF unless they have offline or online access to grab the PDF first and download it to the Chromebook, and then to be able to use it offline. So just the education part for parents and teachers to be able to understand that, or students and teachers to be able to understand how to have offline activities. We ended up going with a process for our elementary schools, and that we had a slideshow that they could use, that the offline activities were embedded in the slideshow. So once the students downloaded the slideshow, they had access to all of those activities that they could work offline if they needed to. And during the COVID closed down or shut down, we had internet access available at all our schools, so students could go to parking lots and download their activities if they needed to and didn't have access to internet. Another big issue for us was the length of time for students to complete their lessons. We, again, as some of the other districts have told you, they would anticipate a lesson taking 15 minutes when they were in the classroom, and the student had access to the teacher or a peer to help them complete an activity. But when students were at home and working on their own and maybe not having the supports that they have in the classroom, it took a lot longer than the teacher anticipated. And that was really across the board, elementary, middle, and high, that they heard, and we heard loud and clear from our parents and from students that that was an issue. So we really had teachers think about that and look at their lessons and think, if you think it's going to take 30 minutes, it's going to take an hour for a student to complete. So, really double the time that you think it would take a student to complete this activity if they're doing it at home without any help. And another one was parent communication, and I think you've heard that from all the districts so far. The more ways you can communicate with your parents, the better off you will be. So if you're, using social media and you have a hashtag for your e-learning, if on your district website, there is a link to your e-learning page. We use robocalls for our district and being able to call families' homes and communicate with them, procedures. We're still, after 2 years of doing this, still need to do more about parent communication, bringing parents into open house and showing them how to access their students' Chromebooks, how to access the activities and the assignments in Google Classroom, just so that they can feel like they are better prepared to help their students and guide them through the process. So again, the more communication you can do, the better off you'll be in the long run. We found that it was a great opportunity for virtual professional development for some of our staff and faculty that were not responsible for conducting e-learning with their students. So we didn't require that for our related arts teachers in K-8. And, if you were a media specialist or a counselor, some of those other positions. So we had a Google Classroom created for e-learning, in which we posted assignments for them to select from. So they had choice as to what they wanted to learn. And they did virtual learning every day as a part of the e-learning process for our staff. So I think that was just something that I think we can really compromise on with our folks that aren't delivering e-learning instruction, but that they can take and use that opportunity to better their own personal learning, and learn things that might help them in other jobs within the district, or just help them really bring their whole, learning about technology and things that are going on in the district up to a different level, where they currently were not able to do that. So I just think that was a win for us and a win for a lot of our staff to really engage them in that virtual professional learning. And the last thing I'll leave you with is I just did a hyperlink to our e-learning website. We have a lot of resources posted on the website for teachers and for parents, and feel free to use any of that. It's open. Just make a copy of it and tweak it to suit your own needs. I think we're all in this together, and there's no need for all of us to individualize and create things over again if it's already been created. I'm pretty sure that I speak for everybody on the panel that we're happy to share anything that we have and anything that we've learned in this process to make it easier on you when you're actually exploring to do e-learning in the next school year.
And Anna, I appreciate that, and what you said is absolutely true. The really neat thing about this is it really has been a collaboration and a partnership with all of us, and we certainly have learned a lot from all of you. And the other thing, I'm the, fifth one to talk now, and I think the other part that is really cool is that even though we're in different districts, our experiences are pretty much the same. And so we really can help those that haven't gone down this journey yet to really avoid some of the pitfalls that we've had throughout. So I really appreciate that. Some of you have already mentioned students need to practice beforehand. We mentioned the skill of learning how to download material to the devices. We also found that our teachers struggled with that more than our kids did. Stewart, you mentioned earlier about teachers not necessarily knowing how to turn the Wi-Fi on and off on their devices. One of the big problems that we had in our district is when devices go home, students do have to connect to their home Wi-Fi, and it runs them back through the filtering system. And so we really tried to get kids to experience that while they were at school by setting up a whole different Wi-Fi and having them connect. And as has already been mentioned, those classrooms where the kids actually had to physically do that versus just being talked through the process really had less issues when they went home. Another pitfall that we found with that is typically our devices do not go home for 3rd through 5th grade either. And so those devices going home for the COVID piece really was a new experience. And actually we did have one e-learning day earlier in the year as well. So we found some of those issues at that point, but we really learned that we've got to do a much better job of making sure our elementary kids, and more so their parents, understand how to do that. And we've put videos out there, as Stewart mentioned, we've put out flyers and all those kind of things that are available for any of y'all to use as well. But even that doesn't seem to be enough. As he mentioned, communication is certainly necessary, but the whole filter thing was an issue for us. As far as lesson goes, we were really concerned about kids not having access to Wi-Fi at home, and what we found similar things with our kids really do have access to Wi-Fi more than we thought that they did. We do have some students, of course, that don't, but the majority of them do. But we really were concerned and tried to discourage teachers from including a lot of video content, just from the time that it takes to download it to the time that it takes to watch it, all those kind of things. But really a lesson learned is for new material is really necessary that students have those video opportunities so that they can stay caught up on their material. We also found that some of our students excel in this realm. Sometimes we don't get to see that, but kids that haven't done necessarily well in a classroom, really when they have an opportunity to do the e-learning and sort of go at their own pace, and work on their own, if you will, really have excelled. So that has been something that's been neat to watch. And then the last thing that I have here is those practice days really are essential, and trying to get your teachers to understand the kids really need to go through the process. The teachers really need to go through the process, not talk through it and not assume. Some of the teachers that had the most difficulty are teachers that I would tell you they are technologically sound. In a classroom, they use their technology every day, but because they didn't pay attention to the downloading and some of the things that happen outside of the school, they really struggled. They made some assumptions that they knew more than they really did. And so encouraging those teachers really to follow the directions.
Well, the benefit to going last in the lessons learned segment is a lot of the lessons have been shared. So Dixon is absolutely right that we have all met enough during the school year to monitor our own progress that we know we've had some similarities. It cannot be overemphasized how important communication to all of our stakeholders in this scenario is, as we have all learned across the state due to COVID and our remote learning situation, which is a little different from e-learning specifically. Communicating with folks and making sure people understand what's going on and how to access tools and resources and so forth is extremely important. I will say the practice days are really important as well. And one of the things I think that Dixon actually shared this within our cohort early on, practicing not just how to download assignments and how to access things for when you get home, but actually letting kids do the assignments during a regular school day while they're with teachers. So I think that was one of the important lessons that we were able to learn from. It allowed our teachers to see some of what folks have referenced as being assignments that took much longer than maybe would have taken in a school setting. They were able to see that taking place. And Dixon actually shared a really good strategy that we did. We had our teachers change kids so that they weren't with their normal teacher. And then that way teachers were able to troubleshoot some of those problem areas as well. And so both of those cannot be overemphasized for their value. And training has been mentioned several times, particularly with support staff. One of the lessons that we learned was, and we're fortunate, we have 2 digital learning coaches. We're small and they cover all 4 of our schools, but training not only for how to access things and the technical side, but also just that support for helping them with developing lessons and helping them know what is to come for the teacher piece. But then also one thing we didn't do very well, and several people have mentioned this as well, is we didn't do enough training with our classified personnel in advance of an e-learning day. So they knew where to go, they knew how to get the assignment, but then once they got the assignment, they didn't really know what to do with it. And so moving forward for next year, that would be an area that we would be willing or need to invest some more time in. But also, one of the other valuable lessons we learned was the ability to be willing to be flexible, particularly with support staff. One thing that we learned is that not all e-learning days require everyone to stay home. If the weather is not severe enough, or if there are opportunities for some of your support staff, such as your maintenance and custodial staff, or even some of your office staff to come in, that it might be more meaningful and good use of their time for them to come in and do their assignments at school as opposed to doing virtual learning at home. And or if they're able to come to school, it may be an opportunity to do an in-person training with them if their technical skills are not where you need them to be for them to be able to access the training. But that's definitely an area that we will work on. And then I would also say that you just got to be willing to let things go wrong. You got to be willing to make mistakes. I think everybody in our group would tell you that we've learned from lessons that we didn't do so well on the first time out. And that's what makes this process so valuable. I think several people have mentioned surveys that they did after their e-learning days, and I would strongly recommend doing surveys with your stakeholders and getting their input so that you can improve on what you're doing. And one thing that I didn't put in the slide, but that as people were talking, I jotted myself a note as folks mentioned communication tools. Early on, one of our mentor districts shared, I believe it was Anderson 5, that they did a hotline that they set up on the day of e-learning so that when parents or staff or students needed help, they could call in and get technical assistance from your tech folks. And that was certainly very valuable. Our folks kept track of that on our actual e-learning day. But then as a result of our extended shutdown through COVID, we did that again. And we had, because those folks were working remotely, we had the opportunity for people to call in and get assistance throughout our shutdown. And that was open to any kind of assistance that they might need. And I think that that was a very valuable use of our support. We had an email as well as a telephone number so folks could do what was most convenient to them. And I would strongly suggest that you have some system of support for folks during this process when you're not on site, so that they are not sitting at home feeling helpless and frustrated.
Okay, now we wanted to address some of our future plans that we have in our districts for e-learning going forward. And I know in Anderson 1, we had one-to-one devices for 3rd through 12th grade. And our 1st and 2nd grade students and our kindergarten students had devices in their classrooms, but it was about a 2-to-1 ratio. So we did not have enough to send them home this school year. But that is something that we're planning to change for next year. So we'll probably start with our 1st and 2nd grade students and then extend it into kindergarten, but for our 1st and 2nd grade to have one-to-one devices to take home for e-learning as well. And then we're also hoping to add additional hotspots. We currently have about 200 Khajiits in Anderson 1 that students were able to check out and take home if they did not have internet access at home. But we're working on extending that so that we have some additional hotspots for students that still don't have internet, and so they'll have something that they can use, because like Stewart said earlier in the presentation, we also had accessibility for internet if people parked in our parking lots at our schools, but we didn't see that used in a wide variety of different situations. It seemed like the travel to get to the schools was sometimes a problem for a lot of our students. So that wasn't used as widely as we hoped that it would be. So that's why we're looking into more hotspots to have for the future.
All right, in Anderson 2, we currently have, well, we're 1-to-1 in grades kindergarten through 12, but we never planned for grades kindergarten 1st or 2nd to take the devices home. And so now moving forward, we will plan for them to take the devices home. We also want to get hotspots for our teachers and our students. And I think we're planning on using some of our CARES funding to pay for that, unless we can get a grant to do that. And then we're also looking into potentially getting Seesaw for schools for grades kindergarten through 2, just because I know that kids can use, like little kids can use Google Classroom, but Seesaw has all of the tools in one app that kids might need. And so I feel like for the younger students, it's just more user-friendly for them to be able to do the lessons they need to do, especially meaningful instruction where they're learning new content and not necessarily just reviewing what they've done.
And to tag on to what Beth just said, some of the surveys we've gotten back, parents vastly preferred text messaging as opposed to phone calls or other types of, even the automated, the robocalls systems. You know, they rather have an email or a text message. And so we're going to look into class tag or remind. We had a lot of success with Dojo for the teachers and students that actually used it in the classroom. It wasn't a really, any kind of transition for them to use it at home. So that was a great thing. So we're looking at those kinds of options too, moving forward. But the biggest thing is we did not send home Chromebooks in 3 through 5, but for COVID we did. And we found a lot of success with that, a lot less issues with those kids and parents, just because parents and kids in 3 through 5 are younger, more apt to know how to connect to Wi-Fi and stuff like that. Apparently, we don't have any hard facts on that. That's just something that, anecdotally we've discovered. And so we didn't really have an issue with 3 through 5 going home. 3 through 5 will be going home next year as a standard procedure. And then what we did was we collected up all the iPads that we had in the district, and we made those available to go home if they wanted them in grades 1 and 2. And we're looking at maybe, if we have enough, making it available for K-5. But if they don't want them to go home, they're not going home right now. And what we're looking at for next year is taking those iPads and saying, okay, on e-learning day, you'll take the iPad home. If it's not e-learning, you'll keep it, at school. But that's our plan, to use that technology, because we don't have a huge budget to be able to buy extras. We're buying some extras right now just to cover 2 through 5 in the classrooms. And so those iPads would really go to waste once we got enough Chromebooks in. And so we're not worried about if they get broken or things like that. We're just, it is what it is. If it gets broken, well, that one's out of circulation now. We're not going to repair them. So it's really a good, we're thinking it's going to be a good way to use some older technology, for not that it's lesser technology, but it's older technology that we need to refresh at some point soon anyway. And so this, we can just kind of squeeze the last little bit of life out of it by sending it home in the young grades. But then also the biggest thing is we've actually looked at, and they're probably going to go with a remote learning kind of scenario for our homebound, instead of having that one teacher who meets with a homebound kid and goes through, 6 or 7 worksheets and stuff like that, for 6 hours a week or whatever you get with the homebound plan, putting it back on the classroom teacher to do a live Google Hangout or Google Meet, where the student can watch the lesson, not so much interact, but can actually watch the content being delivered. And then they send home more of an e-learning lesson, as opposed to hey, do chapter 1 in the workbook, and hope that your homebound teacher knows how to do calculus, or hope that your homebound teacher knows what physical science is, kind of thing. So we're trying to think through using what we've proven is workable with the e-learning scenario and the distance learning, and turn it into a real world. This is how we're going to handle these situations moving forward, and hopefully provide better and more meaningful content, even in a normal situation where it's not e-learning or extended shutdowns or something like that. So that's one of the bigger things that we are taking away from this, is to really use the learning that we've done as a district with e-learning and turn it into how can we make what we provide daily even better based off of this.
In Anderson 5, we really discovered that Wi-Fi was an issue with not a large number of our students, but we have over 13,500 students in our district. So we think around 800 students don't have internet access. And now some of those might be in the same home. So we're hoping we don't need that many hotspots, but to be able to try to provide hotspots for those students that don't have access, so that when a teacher is prepping for lessons, they prep for one type of lesson, and that is a virtual online lesson. We just realized that it takes a lot of teacher time and effort to create the online lesson and the offline lesson, and to be able just to have everybody utilizing the web-based lessons would just be a lot easier for everybody involved, for parents to understand how it works, for students to understand how to access, and for the teacher time in creating those lessons. So that's the focus for us as a district. I think we've already purchased some the month of June, and looking at checking those out to students when we start back to school for those students who lack access. So that is a priority for us in Anderson 5.
In Lexington 2, we also have plans to purchase hotspots for students. And we do have some staff members who also need some, not nearly as many as students, but we also will be using those for some of our teachers that may live out and not near access. We did use packets for first and second graders. Our plans next year are to use devices for grades 1 and 2 as well. So we'll be using devices 1 through 12. And we feel like that will really help with the instructional piece with teachers. And we also have plans to include our related arts, fine arts teachers, special ed resource teachers. So of course, our self-contained teachers have been included, but some of our resource students who are on a related arts type schedule didn't have that opportunity. So we plan to include those classes as well.
In Lexington 3, a lot of the same things that have been mentioned are things that we've considered. We have had hotspots. We'll be adding some of those with our CARES funding to support a greater number due to learning that there was a greater need during COVID. Typically, our hotspots during the school year are available to our high school students. And because we also had devices in homes with grades 1 through 8 as well, we recognized that we needed to add some of those. But our biggest thing is the ongoing training for everybody and determining who's doing what on an actual e-learning day. And moving forward, now that we've also had remote learning with the COVID shutdown, maybe trying to better utilize some of our staff. All of our high school teachers obviously did e-learning assignments. And as many have mentioned, some of our related arts and fine arts teachers in grades K through 5 didn't necessarily do assignments with kids, but I think we've learned through COVID that some of those folks could be utilized to do some lessons on an e-learning day, or at least to even provide some extensions and enrichment opportunities. And so I think just coming to the table with all of our staff and determining who's going to do what and making sure that we have the right supports and resources for them to be able to do that is most definitely part of our plan for next year.
We've listed all of our contact information here, and I think I speak for all the panelists that are on the call today that we would be happy to answer any of your questions. Feel free to email any one of us, and we will try to answer questions that you might have. So you'll have this presentation as a part of this session, and you'll have access to this information. So please reach out to us as you see fit. We also have a link here on the last slide to a Google form. If you would like to just type in your questions, one of us will email you back with a response. So you could either do it via email or through this Google form link, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you at that time. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this presentation. We would like to remind you to complete the evaluation survey and also visit the exhibit hall for the SCASA conference. And we hope this has been beneficial for you. And we hope you have a wonderful summer and look forward to hearing from you in the future.